And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Europe slams Google with another fine totaling $1.7 billion. Its third and possibly final EU penalty. But regulators are still scrutinizing other tech giants like Apple, Amazon, and Facebook. Plus, Apple continuing its hardware revamp. The company unveiled its second-generation AirPods, which provide hands-free access to Siri and 50% more talk time. And the U.S. Digital Service was born in the wake of the bumpy rollout of healthcare.gov. Now, it's stepping up efforts to give Americans better access to government services. But first, to our top story, Google has been fined $1.7 billion by the European Union in the latest antitrust judgment. It is the last of a trio of probes that have led to a total of $9.3 billion in penalties for Google. The search giant is making changes to how it displays ads to comply with an order. Competition Chief Margaret Vestager hinted at less risk of new fines in the future.
When I cite the numbers that we have now and the intentions of Google in the Android decision, this is also to say, well, we don't have a non-compliant issue as it is now. We will, of course, keep following this market, but I think it is positive that Google takes steps that allows for more consumer choice.
Joining us to discuss in Washington, Richard Stables, CEO at Kelku, a shopping search engine which operates in 22 countries and competes with Google in Europe, and Bloomberg's Garrett DeVig, who covers Google for us. So, Garrett, walk us through the finer print here.
So yeah, we have a third and, again, quite a large fine. However, when it comes to Google's balance sheet, I mean, this is pretty baked in. Investors are not really concerned about even these fines that seem to cost a ton of money. And as you said there, this looks like that the heat on Google from Europe after a 10 years of what Google euphemistically called discussions with the EU looks to be closing for them. I don't think that it means that, they'll never be looked at again by European competition authorities. But there are also bigger fish to fry: Amazon, Apple, Facebook. Really what the last 10 years has shown is that, European regulators can go after these big tech companies. They can extract large fines. They can get support for it politically back at home without, getting major pushback from consumers in Europe.
Now, Richard, you've applauded the EU's decision here. What does Google changing its practices in this particular area mean for your business?
Well, thank you for having me. What I would say is that this fine today is something that we've welcomed and consumers have welcomed, but it's not going to change an awful lot in the marketplace. Google have been given basically a cease and desist order, which basically says stop doing what you've been doing, and they stopped doing it in 2016. But in these two-sided markets, basically the market is tipped in Google's favour. And they're going to come out of this and they're going to go, well, we just paid a tax for basically taking over another market. We asked for the commissioner to go further and to force Google to put right the wrongs that it had done to this market, just like it had done in shopping and in Android.
What would putting right the wrongs mean? I mean, to your point, Google controlled 70% of this particular ad market from 2006 to 2016.
Well, what it would mean is effectively market share. You have to look at this and say, Google has all the data, has got all the market. People look at it and say, why can't you compete? Well, we can't compete because they've got this entrenchment with the publishers, and the only way that can happen is if Google was forced to give up some market share, which it looks like the commissioner is unwilling or unable to do.
Garrett, what has Google's response to this been? I know that they have pointed to, this being just a few complaints, as they say it.
Yeah, I mean, Google's response, as it is in these situations, is that they One, because they, in their opinion, have the best business, that they have, the best algorithms to provide these kind of ads and products to the people who pay for them. But it's true. I mean, when they were in control of 70% of the market, that also, gives them that power to continue and grab more and more of it. And it's difficult to see exactly how that would be changed. I think at this point, Google and its investors are pretty confident that they are not going to, be kicked out completely out of these markets. The fines, they're willing to pay them, and they'll continue doing their business as they have.
So, Richard, if Google has owned 70% of this particular ad market, with these changes, how does that percentage or market share change?
I don't think it changes very much at all. I think they'll continue in this market to control it and have at least 70%. Nothing's really changed in their behavior since 2016 when they removed these exclusivity clauses. I think you have to look at the broader context, though, and say, this is a company that's lost its moral compass. This is the third time it's been found guilty of anti-competition. This very, very big fine today, along with the other big fines. But from Google's perspective, it's just a tax to take over more markets.
Meantime, Garrett, Margaret Vestager there said that it appears the EU is not worried about other compliance issues here, but the EU is likely going to train its scrutiny on Amazon, Apple, other big tech companies. What other possible action are we watching for?
So some of those other companies have already faced large penalties when it comes to taxes, and EU officials deciding that the companies haven't exactly paid the taxes that they are owing in the EU. But when it comes to competition, we haven't seen, we have seen some, but not as large as the Google fine. So we do know that there is a probe into Amazon. And of course, we talk all the time here in the United States as well about Amazon and antitrust and its position in the marketplace, especially when it comes to them developing products to sell on their own marketplace and compete against the merchants who use Amazon to find consumers. So that's definitely a space to stay tuned and watch what the EU ends up doing.
All right, our very own Garrett DeVink, along with Richard Stable, CEO of Kelku. Thank you both so much for weighing in.
Thank you.
All right, President Trump said he will keep tariffs on China until he is sure Beijing is complying with any trade deal, refuting speculation that the two nations will agree to roll back duties as part of a lasting truce to their trade war. The comment stem hopes that round-the-clock trade negotiations between the world's two biggest economies could lead to them removing the roughly $360 billion in tariffs they've imposed on each other's imports altogether. But President Trump said he remains hopeful about the talks.
But we're getting along with China very well. President Xi is a friend of mine. The deal is coming along nicely. We have our top representatives going there this weekend to further the deal. But no, we're taking in billions and billions of dollars right now in tariff money, and for a period of time that will stay.
Coming up, Apple continues to build anticipation ahead of its media event on March 25th. Now it is revealing a new version of its AirPods. We'll bring you all the deets next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Another day, another Apple announcement. The company unveiled its second-generation AirPods, now with hands-free access to Siri and 50% more talk time at $159 a pair. The iPhone maker has also revealed that Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon will be a special guest at next week's much-anticipated event. Joining us now with more, Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman. So I was hoping for Oprah, but I'll take David Solomon. Mark, why is David Solomon going to be at the Apple event?
Yeah, so according to sources we spoke to, David Solomon, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, he will be there in attendance. He won't be on stage. The main reason is because Apple and Goldman have an upcoming partnership around a joint credit card that would be tied to Apple Pay. And obviously, because of annual fees and credit card processing fees, this would generate some sort of additional revenue for Apple, who is looking for additional revenue sources through its services business. So this basically fits in very nicely with the rest of the services puzzle that they're going to talk about with video streaming and magazine subscriptions on Monday.
So this is an entirely new thing, a joint credit card between Goldman and Apple, and it sort of feels like a different animal than a new entertainment bundle.
It is a different animal, but again, contributes to the same bottom line as the video service would. The overall services revenue, the different subscriptions that they're trying to shoot for. Obviously, credit cards come as part of a subscription as well. You pay an annual fee every month or every year for a credit card of this nature. It's to be seen what the actual selling point for this thing will be. There's lots of premium credit cards out on the market already. I'll be curious to watch and see who Apple's partnering with on the reward side, whether there's some sort of travel integration, cash back, points, all sorts of features that Chase and American Express have currently.
Meantime, you're here for the third day in a row talking about the third Apple hardware upgrade in 3 days. Tell us about the new AirPods.
Yeah, lucky me. So the new AirPods are second generation of this, but I sort of look at them as a 1.5 or a 1.75 or an AirPods S, so to speak. These are the headphones that were actually meant to be released toward the end of last year, but Apple held them back a bit because they were hoping to launch them simultaneously with the AirPower wireless charger that's still not out. So these include Hey Siri support, so you could say, Hey Siri, and be able to talk with your voice to activate Siri on the headphones. 50% more battery life for talk time specifically, so now 3 hours of talk time instead of about 2 hours previously. And why these are really important, because people who have had AirPods for almost 2 or over 2.5 years now, the battery life is starting to wane. These are small headphones, small batteries, and obviously battery life decreases over time. Now there's going to be a new pair for people who want to upgrade to.
AirPods have been a sort of sleeper hit, but at $159, how big a deal are they for Apple's bottom line and wearables in general?
I think there's this discussion that Apple is looking for products to sort of replace the iPhone in order to combat the slowing sales that we saw in China at the end of last year. But I actually am starting to look at it a little bit differently. It seems like they're doubling down on the iPhone by coming up with these recurring revenues from services and all these new hardware products around the iPhone. Because you have to remember, the AirPods are not a standalone product. For all intents and purposes, they are exclusive to the iPhone. So without the iPhone, the AirPods are not a thing. Likewise with the Apple Watch. Without an iPhone, the Apple Watch is not a thing. The same will be able to be said next year for the Apple augmented reality headset. That's also going to be iPhone connected.
All right, Mark Gurman, we'll see if you're back here tomorrow. I'll be disappointed if you're not, so start looking for a scoop. Thank you so much, as always, for stopping by. Now, Ford has announced it'll spend $900 million and hire roughly 900 workers to build electric and self-driving cars in Michigan. Ford is cutting a shift of workers at its Flat Rock plant because of slow sales of the Mustang and the Lincoln Continental, but it is adding workers to build next-generation vehicles. Here to discuss, Bloomberg's Keith Naughton, who joins us now from Detroit. So what do we know about what Ford is actually planning to build here with these new workers?
Yeah, so they are going to continue to build Mustangs in this plant, but they're going to add new electric vehicles there. And they're no longer going to produce the autonomous vehicles that they said they would build in this plant. So it'll be electric cars and it'll be Mustangs from 2023 onward. They are separately building an autonomous assembly center somewhere in the Detroit area over the next couple of years. That's another $50 million investment. And what they'll do there is they'll take cars that are already built up and then they'll upfit them with the software for the self-driving technology.
Now, production doesn't even start until 2023. Talk to us about Ford's position or lack thereof in the EV market versus other automakers.
Right. Well, I mean, everyone's chasing Tesla, right? So Ford is spending $11 billion to develop a whole raft of electric vehicles. Its first one will be coming next year. They say it's a Mustang-inspired 300-mile crossover electric vehicle, so sort of a souped-up SUV powered by a battery. So that's going to be their first foray. They're trying to make their electric vehicles, as Tesla has done, sexy, rather than kind of an eco play.
Right, overly practical. What does this say then about Ford's broader restructuring?
Well, so they're really trying to make a bet on the future with both electric vehicles and self-driving vehicles, but the return on those at this stage is distant. So they still have to churn out the big SUVs, the big pickup trucks that actually make them their money and are financing their future.
And what happened to their plans to work in Mexico?
So, they canceled a small car plant in Mexico a couple of years ago as Trump was coming into office. But then they were going to, build EVs in Michigan. They moved that down to Mexico. Now they're going to build some EVs in Michigan after all. So they've been going back and forth on the whole electric vehicle, Mexico versus the United States. They also are taking a commercial van out of Europe, out of Spain, and they're going to move that to Mexico. So they still will have Mexican production, but they're beefing up their U.S. production as well.
And what do you make of the timing of this announcement on the heels of GM announcing it would idle a plant in Ohio, which, of course, President Trump didn't much like?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not coincidental at all. Ford is trying to make a little hay here. Much of what they announced today, they have announced previously, just in a different package. Really, the investment amount, $900 million, was previously announced. The jobs, $900 was previously announced. The big change here is that they're going to build electric vehicles in this Flat Rock, Michigan plant instead of autonomous vehicles, and they'll create this new facility to upfit self-driving cars.
All right, chasing Tesla. Keith Naughton for us in Detroit. Thanks so much, Keith, for that update. Coming up, the U.S. has had over 30,000 power outages in the last 10 years. How companies like Bloom Energy are trying to build a more reliable and environmentally friendly solution. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology and follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Lyft is expected to make its NASDAQ debut in 9 days. And one analyst says its IPO filing omits necessary details to create a financial model of the company. In a phone interview, Triton Research CEO Rhett Wallace said, quote, "It's never good when companies decide to not be straightforward about the math of their business, and these guys told us almost nothing you need to build a model." He further said Lyft has not been forthcoming in metrics like separating the acquisition costs of drivers from passengers. Meantime, D.A. Davidson gave Lyft its first buy rating on Wednesday morning. Well, firefighters have extinguished a petrochemical tank fire near Houston, Texas that blazed for almost 4 days. The fire began at the Intercontinental Terminals Company Sunday when a leaking chemical tank ignited, sending a plume of smoke above the city. Authorities have assured residents that the air is not a threat to public health, but after the California wildfires, the chemical blaze further underscores the need for clean energy solutions. Joining us now to discuss, Bloom Energy CEO K.R. Sridhar. Bloom Energy makes fuel cell-based energy servers that allow companies to generate clean energy. So, we've had the fires in Houston. We had the fires, of course, in California. Why is it taking so long for clean energy solutions to catch on?
So this is a scale problem of a very large infrastructure in a place where electricity is becoming a human need a lot more so than it was 100 years ago. Just think about the normal brick and mortar that did not depend so heavily on electricity. Today it's going digital. Digital runs on electricity. And that electricity has to be reliable, resilient, clean, affordable, and accessible. And so energy is a multifaceted issue. And what we try to bring is not any one element of it, but a platform that can integrate all these 5 elements together.
So explain what Bloom Energy does. I mean, you basically use natural gas to make electricity.
So we use natural gas or biogas to generate electricity. We have a Bloom Energy server that comes right next to the premises. Imagine a Home Depot store. Right in the back of the store, we can put this Bloom Energy server. Natural gas, the same gas that comes to heat your house, goes through a pipeline at very low pressure, goes into our system. There is no fire, there is no combustion. Using a proprietary electrochemical process, using a fuel cell, we convert the chemical energy to electrical energy without any fire. And that creates clean energy for the...
Now, Bloom Energy was founded almost 2 decades ago. You did just go public. But when it was founded, it sort of, there was these great expectations about clean tech having its moment. And clean tech still really hasn't had its moment unless it's slowly happening now with Tesla. Why do you think that is?
If you look at the first cell phone, and how long it took for cell phone to become commonplace and mainstream. If you look at the first PC and how long it took, it was about 3 to 4 decades. So if you look at where we are on that curve, I'm extremely confident. Already we are becoming mainstream. Businesses are more and more relying on distributed energy generation, which is part of clean tech. And now, 10 years from now, you'll see a lot more adoption.
So is the moment 10 years from now?
The moment is now, and that momentum will pick up and become even more ubiquitous 10 years.
So when do we see the money? I mean, Bloom Energy still isn't profitable.
On a non-GAAP, without stock-based compensation, we have been net income positive the last 2 quarters we have reported. So, and we are expecting that trend to be strong in the second half of this coming year. We announced that. So we are very confident we'll be financially sustainable and profitable as we go forward.
So, you know, with the PG&E and the California fires, PG&E is going to be filing for bankruptcy. There's a loss of confidence in the whole grid. What do you think the fallout from that is going to be, and how will it affect clean energy?
So more and more companies are going to rely on microgrids. The way for you to think about a microgrid is, should there be something wrong with the macrogrid, which is the utility, you can isolate yourself and have this building have the electricity and all its needs taken care of using a microgrid. And those will be Bloom-like systems along with other energy sources integrated, storage, solar, whatever you have, into a microgrid. In the last 3 years, we have had more than 50 installations of microgrids for our corporate and industrial customers. In fact, just now we're going to announce today and tomorrow two different companies. One is Extreme Networks, their headquarters in Silicon Valley, because they've lost power so often, are using a microgrid for their headquarters.
So you actually power some big customers, big tech customers, Apple, AT&T, SoftBank, Walmart, Home Depot. As the grid changes, how do these problems with outages and, we just saw a big Facebook server issue, how do those problems get smoothed out?
The microgrid will be significantly more reliable and more resilient. Let me give you an example. We actually powered the Osaka fish market. There were 2 super typhoons, and there was a 6.7 earthquake right in the and the epicenter was half a mile from where our energy servers were. We continued to operate through the super typhoons and the earthquake in spite of what happened.
All right.
And that's the reliability. That's the resiliency.
All right, Bloom Energy CEO KR Sridhar, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, the booming kids content on YouTube has created a minefield of ethical and legal issues for its parent company. What is Google doing to protect kids as viewership rises? That's next. This is Bloomberg. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. YouTube has struggled to remove inappropriate and dangerous content since it was founded in 2005. One particular problem area is content for kids, in particular, the so-called kidfluencers and toy unboxing stars. These YouTube personalities use sponsored and paid content in videos. Now, lobbying groups are asking lawmakers and regulators to crack down on the commercial messaging aimed at children, and some of YouTube's steps to clean up its platform, like removing many children's videos from its premium ad program, have made its sponsored content problems even worse. Joining us now to discuss, Bloomberg Tech's Mark Bergen, who has been reporting on this story, and in New York, we've got Loop Ventures managing partner and co-founder Doug Clinton, who covers the internet, including Google, Facebook, and Apple. So, Mark, it doesn't take a genius to spend 10 seconds on YouTube Kids and see that there are problems. You look closely at some specific things. What are the problems that you saw?
Yeah, and the problems in this case, I mean, YouTube has been dealing with problems about sort of the more outlandish and sort of potentially dangerous videos. These are the mainstream videos. These are the most popular video stars. And right now, we're not accusing them. They're not doing anything wrong, right? YouTube has built this system where it's very successful to them to be incredibly engaging, to be very, unboxing videos are the perfect case, right? These are where kids are unboxing a toy. noise. They're often, even if the company has or has not paid for it, it's not clear. There are groups that saying like children under 6 are very impressionable. YouTube's claim right now is that no one under 13 should be using its site.
So hang on, because that is just so disingenuous, because if you can search for Paw Patrol, Peppa Pig, many videos that kids over 13 would not watch, and there is plenty of content.
Right, and that's why it's a really interesting business story, because YouTube, these unboxing stars are homegrown, right? They're not Disney at the moment. They're not other large companies that are building streaming services. And so YouTube has them, and so in one way really wants to promote them. They're a key driver of their growth. At the same time, they're getting into a lot of regulatory issues. They have YouTube Kids, which is an app that's designed for children under 13. We've heard people in this space talk about that. A lot of the content is made for toddlers. It's not necessarily for 8 to 12-year-olds. The major issue here is we reported in the story they have around 18 million monthly active subscribers, which for YouTube, which is 2 billion people worldwide, is just too small. And for Google, historically, that's been something that's not big enough to keep sustaining. So they're at a real inflection point about what they're going to do with kids' content.
Doug, what percentage of YouTube's revenue do you think comes from YouTube Kids?
Yeah, we think kids' content overall, so including the app, is probably around 5% of total revenue, and we think that YouTube did somewhere between $10 and $15 billion in revenue last year. So we're talking about probably a $500 to $750 million a year business advertising alongside of these kids' content products.
So we're watching a video here by Jojo Siwa, who's a famous kidfluencer, and Mark, it was actually some of her videos that you found to be problematic.
So these were groups that have complained to the FTC about Google that point to this, and she's a really interesting test case here. She has a video where she goes to Target, she goes to Walmart, she has clothing line there, she's shopping there. I was told that if this were Nickelodeon on children's broadcast, the FTC would say that's an ad. And you can't have more than 12 minutes of advertising for every hour of programming. On YouTube, it's fine. Target said they didn't pay for this video. It's sort of this new weird version of sponsored content and promotional. Some groups are arguing it crosses a moral line, and they're arguing for the FTC and Congress to say that there's a regulatory line there that they should impose.
So hang on, though. After you contacted YouTube, they actually pulled one of her videos down. Right?
There was a separate video that wasn't from her main channel. And that video, they said, violates their rules about product listing. I think part of the issue here in talking to a lot of YouTube creators and people in the industry is it's not super clear, right? The rules are constantly changing. YouTube has, with a lot of his problems historically, kind of redrawn the line in the sand as they're still adjusting to strong policies. And they have, in their defense, tens of thousands of creators, and it's really hard to communicate them. This is both the benefit and the downside of their business model, right? Is they have thousands of users out there, and they can't tame them all.
So, Doug, traditional television has been regulated for years, and YouTube has avoided almost any regulation. I mean, do you think that there's a serious threat of regulation, and could that dent the business?
I think right now there's probably not a real serious threat. What we're seeing, though, is there's a really blurry line between what is native and what is sponsored. And I think part of the issue is that this kind of world of influencers we now live in, they themselves are their brand. And when you are your brand, everything is native and everything is sponsored, is sort of the ironic thing. And so I think as these influencers build businesses on their brands, you take someone like a Kylie Jenner with Kylie Cosmetics, it's an $800 million business now. So there's huge value in personal branding. And I think as we see more success in that, it'll be even more difficult to separate what is native and what is sponsored.
Right, and the whole goal with advertising is to make it seem, like you're not watching an ad. You want the ad to look as native as possible. Now, YouTube did give us a statement for your story saying YouTube content creators are responsible for ensuring their content complies with local laws, regulations, and YouTube community guidelines, including paid product placements. If content is found to violate these policies, we take action, which can include removing content. It's just once again blaming somebody else. How can they trust that content creators are going to abide by the rules?
And to the larger point about regulation, the FTC did come down on Musical.ly, an app that was $5.7 million fine. This morning, Google was fined nearly $2 billion by the European Union. It had no effect on the market, virtually no effect. Google is almost immune. The sort of curse they have, but it's also their greatest strength as a business, is they have very few to no competitors right now. That could be changing when we see Apple jumping in, we see Netflix being in the streaming, Netflix being much more aggressive about kids' content.
It's
so
such
that reality
different
could change.
content, though. I mean, Doug, do you think those platforms will be a real threat to YouTube?
I don't see things like Netflix as a real threat. I mean, I think when we talk about influencers, it's probably more on the Instagram side, whether it's sort of snackable content. So Instagram is focused obviously more on shorter form content, where YouTube is more longer form. I think that is probably more the threat than someone like a Netflix, which will be more professionally produced.
All right, Loop Ventures, Doug Clinton, Bloomberg's tech smart Bergen. I know you're going to continue reporting on this story. Bergen, thank you so much for stopping by. Coming up, working in the crossroads of Silicon Valley and Washington, we'll talk to the administrator of the U.S. Digital Service, Matt Cutts, about the mission of the nonpartisan agency and how rising techlash could impact regulation. That's next. This is Bloomberg. In the heart of Washington, a nonpartisan technology group has been working to bring government services to Americans through the use of technology. The U.S. Digital Service, known as USDS, has helped speed up veterans' disability claims and break down technical barriers for immigrants looking for green cards. We caught up with Matt Cutts, the administrator at USDS, and started the conversation by talking about the long and bumpy history of government technology services like healthcare.gov and the importance of clean rollouts going forward.
I think it's crucial. You don't always see in government people bringing what we call user-centered design. It's really thinking about the veteran, the doctor, the student, and how to put them at the center of the issue. And a lot of the times, if you just write the specifications and build software for a few years and don't actually talk to users, you don't end up with a good consumer experience.
Now, you worked at Google for many, many years where things move at light speed.
Yes.
Why move to government where things historically move very slowly?
Well, there's a couple reasons. First is just the mission and the impact. I mean, the meaningfulness of the ability to be able to see the impact that you can have is really deeply gratifying. The other thing is technology, you can cherry pick. You can just choose to serve one particular market. Government needs to serve everybody. And that really means that, you know, whenever you talk to somebody over a Thanksgiving dinner table, they are able to see, okay, this is the impact that it has on my life.
Has it been a bit of a culture shock for you, though?
Yes. We like to joke that the U.S. Digital Service is like a bridge in between the worlds of technology and government, and the two worlds don't always speak well together, so you can come into a safe spot and learn a little bit about how to speak the other language.
Now, you worked under the Obama administration, you're now working under the Trump administration. You don't set policy, but you execute. What has it been like working for two very different presidents?
What's really gratifying is the fact that we care about implementing systems so that government systems that millions of people use work really well. And we've had support in both administrations. It's not a partisan issue to say technology in some cases is broken, and a system, whether it's a veteran getting her benefits or a student trying to figure out whether to go to a college, for them to get the information that they need and for that service to work well. So we've actually gotten great support, and we're gratified that we're able to make good progress.
Now, the president is once again taking on Google, Facebook, Twitter, accusing them of bias. Is that fair?
It's an interesting question. In my mind, I'm like levels down, where I'm just worried about, you know, if you have a particular doctor who wants to submit a payment for Medicare, does that system really work? I think it's really fun to talk about, you know, after hours in conversation and that sort of thing. But I think in the same way that DC doesn't always understand Silicon Valley doesn't always understand DC. And the more cross-pollination we have, probably the better for everybody.
What does Silicon Valley need to understand better? In the era of techlash, I mean, there's been so much backlash against these companies.
There has been. You know, I was at South by Southwest, and I sat down eating a hot dog at a table, and somebody pitched me on a startup that does augmented reality dance lessons. You know, and I think Silicon Valley can do a little more thinking about the sorts of services that everybody needs, not just a select few.
We saw many of the Democratic presidential candidates gather there, and they are taking on big tech. We're also seeing state attorneys general in the early stages of exploring whether Google in particular presents an antitrust case. Do you think Google presents an antitrust case?
So as someone who serves in the government, I don't want to take a position on that sort of thing. But from the time that I worked in government, there were a lot of very earnest people just working to make sure that the best quality of search results showed up. for me, it's a question of, there's the Federal Trade Commission, there's the Department of Justice. People need to look at consumer harm and consumer good, and that's, a question that people can look at.
How about a broader question? Senator Elizabeth Warren saying big tech needs to be broken up. Amy Klobuchar saying she wants an investigation. Do you think big tech more broadly needs to be broken up?
For me personally, it's not a matter of breaking up so much as big companies should realize that they are probably going to be scrutinized. And I think most companies realize that and are starting to accept the fact that no matter what, they are going to have to think about their impact, not just amongst their consumers and their markets, but throughout the entire country and the world.
You handle some of the most sensitive data about American citizens, medical records, for example. Google and Facebook have a lot of sensitive data about us. Is it clear at this point that we can't trust them with our data?
So one thing that's kind of interesting is that if a tech company or any company loses the trust of its consumers, I think that people will start to leave it. They have the choice to take their data out or to stop using Facebook or whatever the company is. The part that interests me on a day-to-day basis is if you think about the U.S. government, what is the trust in the U.S. government and how can we make that work a little better? There was a poll that just came out where for the first time the U.S. government was listed as if it were a company, and of the top 100 companies, it was dead last. And so there's a lot of ways that technology can make government work better for everyday people.
And yet we're continuing to see areas where technology is failing. I mean, there was just this mass murder in New Zealand, live video of it going up on Facebook and then getting reposted hundreds of thousands of times. Is that an example? In this case, they were almost powerless to stop their own power. So what can be done about that?
That's an interesting case because there is the notion of something that you don't want to show up, like spam. I used to work on spam on Google search results. And then there's also the notion of real-time things that you don't want to show up. So this idea of something going viral and people live streaming, really terrible stuff, I suspect the tech companies just haven't had the time to adjust to that specific model. I would not be surprised if there's engineers throughout Silicon Valley thinking about how can they adjust so that that sort of thing doesn't happen as easily in the future.
Meantime, we're seeing tech companies increasingly work with the government, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and this has caused, especially in Google's case, employee protests around Google's work with the Pentagon, such that Google actually ended a contract to help the government interpret aerial drone footage using Google AI. Is that a mistake?
I think reasonable people can have different viewpoints. I was talking to Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, recently. He came to visit at one of our staff meetings, and we got to ask him questions. And he had a really interesting position that said Microsoft is basically a platform, and the platform should allow all kinds of customers and clients to come in, and you can't anticipate all the different ways that somebody's going to use a platform. It is definitely the case that people are going to be grappling with these issues, for quite some time to come.
Well, Nadella and Microsoft have actually made some different decisions than Google has. Google has actually said, we're not going to work with the Pentagon on this particular issue, whereas Microsoft, in the face of protests, has said we are going to continue to work with the government. Is one decision better than the other, or?
I think it shows a little bit of the DNA of the company. Microsoft is used to producing tools and doesn't worry as much about, okay, we want to enable and empower our customers. I think it does show the power that individual engineers, designers, product managers have within Silicon Valley to make new changes happen within their company. The only thing that I would say is if anybody's going to vote with their feet, we have lots of non-partisan things that will help make things work better if people want to try a different flavor of public service.
So what are your top priorities for the U.S. digital service this year?
We're thinking very hard about veterans. We're thinking about how to improve healthcare. There's a ton of things that can be done, like moving service members' families from one part of the country to another. It's way more stressful than it needs to be. We recently were honored to partner with Veterans Affairs to help rebuild a new website called va.gov that makes it much easier for veterans to access their benefits.
The diversity statistics of the U.S. digital service are actually quite impressive. You've got 50% women, 60% women in leadership, and you have 180 technologists across multiple different agencies. So how did you do that when Google and Facebook and all of these very wealthy tech companies can't figure it out?
Yeah, certainly there's a full court press. We go to conferences like Grace Hopper, Celebration of Women in Computing, Lesbians Who Tech, Afrotech, all those sorts of places. But we also recruit from across the country, not just Silicon Valley. We want to go to Tucson, Arizona. We want to go to Columbus, Ohio. And what we have found is we give better results to our people that we work with when we better represent America. And so we get to not only be able to advertise our mission and our impact and the sorts of things that government can do well, but we can also say, you know what, you can come and have a leadership responsibility here.
Matt Cutts there, U.S. Digital Service Administrator. Still ahead, from hotel reservations to credit card services, Japanese e-commerce giant Rakuten does it all. But can it keep up with Amazon? That's next. This is Bloomberg. Since pioneering e-commerce in Japan in 1997, Rakuten has expanded its empire to more than 80 businesses. But while offering span from banking and insurance to online ads and drone deliveries, the company is increasingly losing ground to the likes of Amazon. I sat down with Rakuten CEO Miki Mikitani on the latest episode of Bloomberg Studio 1.0 to talk about the e-commerce competition. Take a listen.
Our model is create membership program and use data so we can cross-sell our services. And mobile services is the another big project we can heavily discount and provide to our merchants.
In Japan, some would say that you're losing share to Amazon in e-commerce. Is that fair?
No,
Looking
I don't
at the
think so.
charts.
I do not believe so. There are totally different aspects of the how to count.
So how would you characterize the competition in Japan?
They don't have disclosed any numbers, to be very honest. So it's very difficult for me to compare. But as far as our growth is concerned, we are, growing really at the right speed. The challenge is logistics. So now we're engaging in logistics. So I think we're in a good shape.
Well, Jeff Bezos might be a little distracted lately, so that could be an advantage.
I don't think Jeff is so concerned about Japan that much. Right.
He has doubled down on India. Do you think that they've not taken full advantage of the opportunities in Japan?
Well, Japan is a different market. The consumers are so sophisticated. The variety of the product they want is very high. They want to receive very clean package. Not necessarily the Amazon approach in US will do well in Japan. We have more smaller stores, smaller merchants. We need to make them happy. The conceptually, Rakuten is totally different. We are more partnership driven than Amazon. Amazon wanted to dominate everything. We would like to help small and medium-sized merchants.
So who's a bigger threat, Jeff Bezos or Masayoshi Son?
I don't think everybody is a threat. Everybody is a rival. One thing I can tell you is we are well positioned because we are not only one single service provider focusing on one vertical. We provide our value as a package, including banking, telecom, credit card, insurance, shopping, travel, content as a package. So if you want to just focus on one vertical, I think it's very, very risky.
Masa is obviously a competitor in the wireless business. Now he also has the Vision Fund, investing huge amounts of money in tech companies, which you also do. What do you think about what they're doing with the Vision Fund?
I think he's a, excellent investor. So he may or may not make it. I don't know. About the competition in Japan, the quality, cost of our service will be better than anybody, for sure. And when we go to 5G, our network is going to be 5G ready from the beginning, the only company in the world. So I think the future looks very, very good to me. Of course, there will be a competition. They will try to do everything to block their users moving to Rakuten. Maybe our growth is going to be as fast as we initially planned. But I think, after all, the structural difference is very, very clear. And I don't think anybody can match our quality and our price.
One more question about the Vision Fund. Do you think there are any ethics issues with their ties to the Saudi government?
That depends on the philosophy of the company, right? And I am very careful about taking money from whom. But some companies do not care because money is money. But so it depends on the character of the founders. Some companies I have seen are becoming a little bit more careful about the source of the money because these innovation companies are very, very emotional driven. It's more value driven. And it's not just about money. So therefore, some people are more careful. Some people don't care. So it depends.
Is that a mistake?
Is it to take
Not
money?
to care.
Not to care.
Is it?
For me,
Is it a mistake to take money from a government tied to the murder of American journalists?
first of all, we don't know the truth. So to be very honest, I don't think I have a right answer. But for our portfolio company, if you have influence, we will advise to be careful.
My interview there with Rakuten CEO Miki Mikitani. You can catch the full interview on Bloomberg Studio 1.0, Wednesday, 9:30 p.m. Eastern, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. On Thursday's show, we're going to be covering Lyft's IPO roadshow in New York. And we'll sit down with two investors, Floodgates and Mira Ko, and Mike Maples. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology. And be sure to follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.